The Village of Cary for September 19th, 2023 to order with roll call, please.
Dudek,
Here.
Collier,
Here.
McAlpine, here. Walrath,
Here.
Weinhammer, here. Stefani,
Here.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Living the dream. Thank you. Now moving to the open forum where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. I have nobody signed in. Is there anybody here who would like to address the village board? None said. We'll close open forum at 6:01. I have one proclamation on my report today. It's for Rail Safety Week, September 18th through the 24th, whereas in Illinois, 148 crashes occurred at railroad crossings, resulting in 44 personal injuries and 25 fatalities during 2022. And whereas the state of Illinois is a leader in supporting highway, rail, grade crossings, and pedestrian safety programs, and whereas 2023 marks the 9th year that Operation Lifesaver has designated a National Rail Safety Week, which coincides with a Rail Safety Week in Illinois to implement the safety initiative across the county. And whereas the Cary Police Department will be participating in the important safety endeavor. Now, therefore, I, Mark Koenig, Mayor of the Village of Cary, do hereby proclaim September 18th through 24th, 2023 as Rail Safety Week and encourage all citizens of the Village of Cary to recognize the importance of rail safety, education, and obey all rail safety laws. Dated this 19th day of September 2023. Now on to consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items A through H as shown on the village website and displayed on the video monitor during the village board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call. Courtney, please.
Stefani,
Yes.
McAlpine,
Yes.
Weinhammer,
Yes.
Dudek,
Yes.
Walrath,
Yes.
Collier,
Yes.
Thank you. We have one item on our separate action is I will entertain a motion to approve a waiver of certain application requirements for a planned development application related to the development of the property located on the southeast corner of Hickory Nut Grove Lane and South Rawson Bridge Road.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Mayor and the Village Board. The request this evening is related to a proposed development concept for the property located outside the Village of Cary at the southeast corner of South Rossbridge Road and Hickory Nut Grove Lane. As the board may recall, the developer was in before the board last August with the initial concept proposal. They've since have gone back and somewhat refined their plans, continue to look at the property as far as what sort of development they think would be feasible on the property, and are looking forward to potentially moving forward with the zoning petition on this site. As we discussed previously, the property will require annexation into the Village of Cary, so there will be the need for an annexation agreement. And also to extend utilities to the area. The staff and the developer have had various preliminary discussions regarding potential need for a special service area that would cover or finance the cost for those public improvements to serve the property. The village historically has had 2 special service areas that we've approved for various developments. Those include the Cambria subdivision, which is just over here on the west side of town. And also the Foxford Hill subdivision, when that was annexed and developed, there was a special service area approved as part of that as well. So as this project were to move forward, there would need to be additional discussions with the development team on what the parameters of the special service area would be, but also detailing those specifics within an annexation agreement. Generally, for the process for the creation of an SSA, you would have the annexation agreement be approved by the village board first. And then we go through the process of establishing an SSA, which there are various statutory requirements for public hearing and adoption of that as well. That would take I believe, 3 to 4 months time period between when those meetings would take place. And then the proposal this evening, as you can see from the concept plan as presented, is looking at a potential a three-phase approach to develop the property. 2 of the parcels, and the developer can give more information on this, are currently owned by the development team, and there's a third parcel that's along South Rushbridge Road that could also be potentially incorporated into the project for the full 3-phased development. And then the request this evening is specifically to discuss the concept as proposed, if this is something that the village board continues to be open to in this area for development, as our comprehensive plan calls for single-family attached housing and is a proposed future use of the property, which this plan is similar to. The plan will have individual units, single-family attached to it, but also will have units that will have single floor living or floor units above and below each other, which will still look like a single family attached housing unit, but would actually be a multifamily product intermixed with single family attached as well. So the density and the proposal, the number of building pads that were shown on the previous slide, you can see that there are 45 building pads in the first phase, but due to the unit count with that potential for multiple units in a similar space, there would be 75 units in that first phase. And developer has had some conversations with staff as far as the potential for the incorporation of some affordable units within the project, not the entire project. Maybe a certain percentage of units might have the ability to be for workforce housing. And where that percentage might fall would be open for discussion if that's something that the board is open to consider on the property. So the request this evening, again, is just to discuss the concept plan as presented. Now I can let the developer give more information as far as their concept, but then also to discuss some of the application waiver requests as the project would require approval as a planned unit development. We'll have to go through a zoning process, and then there are certain waivers that they've requested within the memo, which we can get into more conversation throughout this evening as far as what the board might be comfortable with potentially waiving. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gray from Treeline Partners to give more information on his project, and then I'll be happy to answer questions after his presentation as well.
Good evening.
Hello.
Is this on?
I think so.
I think so. Everyone can hear okay. Well, good evening. Thank you for taking the time, Mayor and the village board. Appreciate you taking the time to review this information and look at it. Before I started, I'd like to just say thank you, particularly to Brian. He's been very helpful. We're always working on a number of different projects, and some of the conversations that we've had back and forth and analyzing some of the different aspects of this project has actually even helped us with some other projects. So it's been terrific with regard to that. So we're grateful for that, for the process and how we've been able to somewhat move forward with it. So I think that I think Brian did a great job of outlining that. I think the packet had quite a bit of information in there, so I won't bore anyone, particularly on a Tuesday evening when there's not a lot on the agenda, with some of those specific details. But in terms of just touching on some of the things and maybe revisiting where we were when we looked at this previously and where we're at this evening, I think might be beneficial as well. So the proposal that we had looked at previously, I think was roughly about 18 dwelling units to the acre, that rough sketch that we had worked through. We'd actually, and I don't think that that's been presented to the board, but there was another scheme that we worked on earlier in the year, and that was actually pretty tight, and it was less actual buildings, but the buildings were slightly larger in terms of more units. And as we've been working through the economy that we're in and trying to understand where the market's at, and also trying to think long-term with regard to how the project may work, we've refined it further. We've brought that back further from the 18 down to what's roughly now 14 dwelling units to the acre. I always hesitate to talk about density with regard to dwelling units to the acre, because I don't think it's necessarily a great metric to be using. You can have dwelling units that have a very large footprint, and other dwelling units that have a very small footprint, but everyone's still just calling them a dwelling unit. So I think it's important as we analyze, projects like this, we also look at things like impervious surface. So that's something that we've spent quite a bit of time on analyzing this as well. And a couple different things. One thing, so the numbers as you look at them and in the presentation, can everyone hear me okay? I feel like I'm kind of going in and out on this a bit. Feel free to interrupt me at any point as well too. So the unit count for the entire, and it's actually, in terms of the ownership, it's nearly 12 acres, but when you pull it back to right-of-ways, to the right-of-way net space, it works out to that roughly 11.2. Usually when we're doing calculations, we use gross, so we get a little bit better. The numbers come down a little bit. But when you look at it on purely a building pad basis, I think it drops to just below 9 dwelling units to the acre. If we're looking at it in that metric, which I think is an interesting way to do that as well. And again, with the economy that we're in, and the things that we see and how we try to project these things further out, what we've arrived at, and this is by working on, again, a number of different projects, but this idea of having a building pad, which roughly those are between 26 and 28 feet wide, sometimes down to 24 foot wide, and then 36 to, say 40 feet deep. That's what a typical pad would be, and then you can see in the site plan diagram how that aggregates, and that's again one of the waivers that we're looking at as well, which may be part of the next part of the exercise in terms of the maximum 6 dwelling units per building. Is that right?
So that would be looking more at zoning information as far as when you go through the zoning process, what type of waivers or departures there would be from the code. Right, this evening would be more the application requirements that would be submitted as part of the zoning petition.
So I'm getting ahead of myself.
Correct.
Right? Okay, apologies for that. But again, back to this whole idea of the footprint, and part of this idea of which, if we could flip to the elevations for a second. One of the things that we've gotten actually pretty excited about as an organization is this idea of the unit, the structure would look like a traditional townhouse unit from an exterior, but the way that we've worked on the design with regard to the interior and with regard to the entrances to the structure, that it could actually be segregated so that let's call it a 26 by 36 footprint, could actually have 2 dwelling units in it. And I think we kind of talked about that a little bit in the designation as well. And again, as we look at the market and we see, okay, what is the housing need that's out there? It's not all about, everybody having that, full 1,800 or 2,200 or 2,400 square feet. So we're actually really excited about that and the ability for that to be something that works with compatibility. You get the strength of the architectural aspect of it coming through without having to, make other types of compromises. And then the other thing maybe I'll just touch on real quick, and then I really will stop and ask for some specific questions. But the way that we arrived at this workforce housing is we've been working again on some other projects in some other communities, and this issue keeps coming up. And there's this whole idea of, how are people going to be able to afford to live near where they work. And some of these programs, as we've kind of dug deeper into them, and again, credit to Brian because he's been a real source of information on some of this, which has been terrific. When we're talking about workforce housing, I think it's important to understand, what that is. And you probably all understand it well, but it's someone that has, a job, they're employed, and they're able to, based upon these different metrics, be able to determine whether or not they're able to use and to live in one of those types of units. So again, it's a way that we see that, it provides a need. I think there's requirements that, that the community has and such as well. And so we see it as a potential solution that has a win-win component to it. The other aspect that I'd like to throw out, and I don't think we really talked about it in any of the documentation that we've sent across, but there's a particular project in England called Poundbury that's been built. It was driven by the Prince of Wales initially, and about, I think statistically, about 35% of the project, and it's a massive project, some 500 acres, but about 35% of it is a type of, different than what we have here in America, but a type of housing that is affordable for people. But what's interesting about that is it's what they call tenure neutral or tenure blind. And so what it means is that from the outside, you can't tell. You can't tell which units are workforce housing units and which units are not. And I think we think that that's just a brilliant strategy. We think in terms of the idea of being able to provide, housing for people in a way to really, honor people by doing it in such a way. We think it's just a terrific solution, rather than, segregating and putting different pieces and such. So that's something that we've become very excited about, and the idea of how that we're thinking about segregating the units. We think it just has the potential to be a great solution. And again, we like to think very long term when we're doing these projects. So that's really part of the basis behind what's driven us to be able to have the solution that we're presenting to you this evening. Hopefully that's helpful.
So I just wanted to go back to what it actually says here. Consider for approval a waiver of certain application requirements for a planned development application. Can we just go through that? Yeah.
Sure.
I kind of feel like we got a little off track, and I just wanted to. Awesome. Yay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's generally these meetings we've had the concept reviews or concept discussion on the proposed development. Obviously, if they're proposing to go through the development PUD process, we have the various application requirements that are within our PUD ordinance that would apply to any application. And we do have the ability at the village board level to approve waivers of those requirements. So the memo lists off basically items C through Q, which are application requirements. A and B are not listed because they're basically, you have to fill out the application that we have and provide information to who's part of the project. So they're not things that we generally would grant waivers for. But so the waiver requests that the developer is seeking were to items K, to provide a traffic study for the proposed development. Item L, an economic analysis study for the proposed development. Item M, an environmental statement. Item N, a village's services demand analysis. Item O, the offsite utility plan. And item P, the drainage plan. As detailed in the memo, the staff does have some concerns as far as some of the waiver requests, just due to the size and scope of the project. And then with the potential for village participation in a project through an SSA for utility improvements, there may need to be some of these plans provided as part of that analysis. That's where, as detailed in the memo, some of those items are things that the village would look for generally for a larger project, where waivers that we've granted in the past have been for more smaller scale infill type developments. That might not have required stormwater detention as part of their facilities. As an example, that waiver has been granted where it's a small 1 acre site that didn't need to provide additional detention for that facility. In this case, detention would be required per the stormwater management ordinance to the county, so that would be an area that the staff would not be supportive of that type of waiver from that standpoint. So Happy to answer any questions there may be on the specific waiver request and kind of what staff's direction may be, but also open to discussion from the board as far as, if there's specific concerns with specific waivers requested as well.
Trustee Walworth, we talked about this a little bit today. Go ahead.
I'm happy to start. First of all, we welcome, thank you for bringing this forward. I agree with your assessment on the need for this type of housing, for workforce housing in our community, all outstanding items. Specific to the question at hand for tonight, which is the waiver of particular items. For us to consider that in the board, in my opinion, if there have been some of these studies that have been done in that area for other developments, I think that might be pertinent. And I'll look no further than down the street on Main Street where, we're well aware of traffic conditions on Main Street. We're well aware of a lot of these different impacts in these other areas where we've had items. This would be a parcel that is not in the Village of Cary. We do not have this information. And I'll be forthright enough to say this would be in my backyard. Okay. So I would be very concerned about the data coming out of all these studies, particularly when it comes to drainage and environmental statements. That parcel does back up to McHenry County Forest Preserve or Conservation District, excuse me, as well as very close to our river. So those are things that I think are very, very pertinent to any type of, you mentioned hard surface early. We're talking about adding hard surface in what's historically a green area. We need to understand what we're doing to our area. And being as it's not in the village currently, we don't have any historical information on that. Right. So I would be open to the discussion of waiver of other type items, but I would wholeheartedly agree with staff on not being supportive of the items that were requested, because I think they will provide highly valuable information for us for our decision.
Anybody else have any? Trustee Weinhammer?
No, I completely agree with Trustee Walworth. It's not in my backyard, but to all his points, I completely agree with. Maybe there are some points that we would go ahead and consider a waiver to, but not all of those. So thank you for saying all that.
I'm going to piggyback. I can't say it much better than what he said there. Again, we're very excited. We've been looking at this. This has come before the board before, so this is not brand new. So the idea of the concept, I really like it. But I think in order to make a good decision, a well-informed decision, we need some of that pertinent information. So I rely back to our experts and what they think we need to have, but definitely agreeing, especially with the aspect of adding something on green space and how could that affect in the water drainage and what the impacts of some of that are. I think we really need to have. I think you need to have to know that also as a developer.
Yeah, and I'm happy to speak to that as
Sure.
well. So, yeah, that's absolutely correct. And we've already gone through the preliminary analysis looking at, and so we've got rules of thumb, of what's going to work in terms of issues like stormwater. And, I've been involved in so many traffic studies that, I have a sense of what's going to come out of there. And Brian, I've had some conversations about that. And so we have some expectations, that some things are going to go. I think the purpose, and we talked about this as well, in terms of the whole idea of the waivers is, we know at the end of the day that there are going to be certain requirements that we're going to have to meet in order to be able to get the project approved. We're under no false expectations with regard to that. We've, been doing this for decades, so it's all very well understood, but particularly stormwater issues. And just to that point, this is a commercial site. If we're able to go back to just the site plan for a second, through McHenry County, the parcel up there where 109 and 106, 108 are, those are zoned commercial right now because that's where the Rivers Bend restaurant was. So it has an impact that I'm hopeful, that we're going to actually be making an improvement in terms of what was there historically and what's, going forward with regard to that. So, and I guess we know that all these things are going to have to be done. It would just be our preference that we're able to push that back a little bit further in the process. So, if there's things that are non-negotiables, we get it. If there's things that we can, work together on with regard to, finding some kind of and I know that we've done some traffic studies before too, where it's kind of a traffic study light depending on, you know, I know that it, you know, sometimes looks like there's going to be a fair amount of traffic that's going to be generated, but then when the traffic study actually comes through and, you know, we're having those conversations with the engineers, you know, they kind of know almost immediately what some of that impact is going to be. So,
Can I ask for some clarification? So when you say that you know that some of this stuff is going to have to be done later on in the project, my question to Brian is, if we waive it, is it waived throughout the whole project, or is it going to come up at another point? I'm trying to understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, so from the waiver standpoint that is before the board this evening is for the PUD application. So these are requirements that we've identified as a village that the village board wants to review as part of any zoning petition that gets PUD approval. So going through the zoning process, these would be items that we generally would require as part of a zoning petition that would be reviewed by the ZPA and village board for approval. So if these are things that the developer is hoping to push further off into the distance, you know, from a timing standpoint, we still would look to have these at some point through a process here. So generally we would, from our standpoint, it would go through as part of the application for a zoning request. We would ask for that information to be up front. But if the board is, you know, willing to, you know, delay some of those things to have preliminary reviews or analysis from that standpoint, that's something we can have further discussion on. But generally, we have one application with these requirements attached to them.
So they wouldn't be waived per se, we're delaying looking at those. So I mean, someone can't, just give me an example, someone can't sit there and say, I'm not gonna do drainage on a new development.
should we start at the beginning?
Do you know, you follow what I'm saying with that?
No,
I wanna make
yeah.
sure that I'm understanding it. You're asking for a delay in some of the things, not that, hey, I'm not willing to do a drainage analysis, I'm not willing to look at how this is gonna affect stormwater. You're just saying in the initial process, you don't want to do it right up front. You want to wait later on in the process? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so the issue with delaying it in the process is if you're going through a zoning process, you know, we're reviewing a project that if there's not preliminary engineering from a drainage plan perspective, you could plan a project and have a concept plan, you know, as presented here, that might not have adequate stormwater detention that could accommodate, you know, the proposed development. So that could impact the design that the board, you know, reviews from a standpoint that the detention might need to be doubled or tripled in size, or, you know, possibly even reduced as well if they plan for more. So there's not knowing that information or having that preliminary analysis is, you know, beneficial from a review standpoint as well, to know when detention is being constructed as part of a project. Is it all in phase one? Is there enough detention in phase one that would also serve phase two? You know, that type of information is generally why you need to have that detail.
And I believe I believe we're also just asking the board is if you consider, and as you consider these waivers to the application pieces here, are you comfortable making the preliminary review and approvals without those at that point?
Yeah, and so
I get it.
and so just to speak to that,
Go ahead.
if I could. I mean, kind of the flip side of that is, so, you know, we really don't do anything without talking to our engineers, right? You know, so our civil engineers already looked at it. He's been doing this for decades. You know, his father did it for decades before he did. So when they take a look at a site, you know, they've got a good handle on those things. So, I mean, to Brian's point, I mean, you got to get it right. But at the same time, you've got the opportunity to, you know, utilize different solutions as you get into it as well. You know, there's about 3 different ways to handle some of that stormwater aspect. So, you know, from our perspective, what we don't want to do is we don't want to incur too much cost on the front end, and then things change, and then we have to end up doing it all over again. And believe it or not, you know, that's happened before. So, I mean, I think in many ways it's kind of a conditional approval. I mean, we're not saying that we're not going to comply with any of these things. I mean, we're willing to comply with all of it. It's just where it's at in the process. And I guess to the point of some of the smaller projects, and you know, by some standards, this would be a smaller project too, you know, compared to, you know, a 100-acre development or something. And so I guess that's
Why don't I have, Brian, why don't you review what your staff recommendations are? Why don't we just go through that? I think it might clear up some of the misconceptions that are here.
Yeah, so and I appreciate the questions regarding this. So from the, looking at the proposed items, the waiver items that we've approved in the past for various projects that have come before the board since we approved our PUD requirements back in 2019 is when we did the UDO update. All the projects that we've seen have come in have been for 1 acre, 2 acre sites or very small properties. So the waivers that we've approved for those projects, they differed in scope and scale as compared to this proposed facility or proposed development. So the roughly 12 acres that is proposed to be development, the traffic study, staff had concerns with not providing a traffic study as there's, with the annexation of the property, you're going to also be incorporating the right-of-way for Hickory Nut Grove Road as part of the project will need to come into the Village of Cary. That roadway will need to be improved to the village's standards. There's going to be roughly 150 or 170 units on the property here through all 3 phases. What is the impact of that new growth on both Rosslyn Bridge Road and also Hickory Nut Grove Road, make sure that it's adequately designed from a access standpoint for potentially turn lanes in or out of the property. What is the demand that would be on the roadway from that standpoint? So staff has concerns with a waiver of a traffic study in this case due to the size of the project for all 3 phases. The economic analysis study and the village's services demand analysis kind of go hand in hand as far as looking at if there's a need for SSA here to provide services to this property for public utilities. There's going to need to be an analysis to determine what the feasibility is of that SSA and what the utilities are that would go into that as well and what those costs would be. So that those studies would help to determine what those impacts would be. So staff believes that that's something that we would likely look to have as part of a proposal here as well. Likewise with the environmental statement, as Trustee Walrath indicated, it's area that's adjacent to some not forget the word, blanket on the word, sensitive properties. As far as the conservation district property are close to the river as well, so there are some potential impacts that will be there. The statement is not to say that it's a full impact study that needs to be done. It's more to analyze these are the existing conditions of the property, these are the environmental features that are there, and what sort of techniques the developer may take to preserve or mitigate those impacts to surrounding property. So it's not an extensive response, but basically identifying if there are any wetlands on the property, what might need to be done to mitigate those. The drainage plan is something that would be required through the development for the stormwater ordinance through the county. So that's something we will need to see through any development. Realistically, from this scope and scale, there's going to need to be a drainage plan and stormwater prevention plan from that perspective. So that's kind of the feedback that I would have as far as these items in this particular project. I think it's, from a staff perspective, difficult potentially to grant waivers in regards to the scope and scale of this project as far as how it might need to go through the process.
Sure. So you mentioned at this point in the process, you're asking for these waivers. So in the process, going for the application, are these required to turn in the application is what you're saying?
Correct. So this project is unique from a standpoint, it has annexation. So there's a component of the project that we'll need to just negotiate an annexation agreement with the developer and development team.
But can they go forward with the application project and add these on after they approve the application, but would it have to be annexed then before that?
So the zoning application, in order to submit the zoning petition, which this would be related to their zoning petition, these requests. So these would be items that we would review as part of that zoning petition. So separate of the annexation agreement, this would be information that would be discussed and reviewed as part of a zoning board public hearing on the proposed project. The annexation agreement, we can have separate discussions on that and work out those details, but this would be generally information that we would need to have to review a proposed project to verify that how it would comply with zoning and if it's feasible from a zoning
So
perspective.
you're asking for the waivers because if it's a money issue now?
Well,
Yes.
if I could present kind of the other side of it, I feel like in many ways we've already done a lot of this. Because we wouldn't be here presenting this to you if we didn't think it was gonna work, right? I mean, environment, I mean, if I could have a chance just to run through the list now as well. It's my turn, Brian.
Go ahead.
So with regard to traffic study, again, you know, we worked on a lot of these projects, similar scale, and it seems like there'd be a fair amount of traffic that would be added, but when you actually really get into the numbers, and I could probably even pull up a study, it actually sometimes becomes pretty surprising. And I don't doubt that we're gonna probably have to do something in terms of accommodating some of that, but, you know, the reality is we may, if we could go back to the site plan again, sorry, you know, we may even change a little bit in terms of how we get out onto South Rawson Bridge Road. Because, for instance, we've chosen not to show any kind of a major access out onto South Rawson Bridge Road. We've got one there kind of towards the south end there. But we've done that because it's pretty dangerous. And when you're out there, you go up over that hill, particularly where the River's Bend restaurant is, it's, you know, I don't want my teenagers, you know, pulling out onto there and, you know, people coming up over the road. So all that to say, so I think there's a chance that some of that's going to change. So we do the traffic study and then we come back in and we do it a little bit different. Then we have to do the traffic study again. So that's the first point. Second point, with regard to the utility improvements, so we've already done a bit of the engineering work in terms of what's going to have to happen with servicing the site. So if you look at the site plan, up at the top and it says LS, that's for a lift station. So we're going to have a sanitary lift station, and we've already had that, a preliminary design for that. We've already had that preliminary costing done for that, and it's not inexpensive. But it's important, it has to happen, and that's going to take that effluent from that location, it's going to push it to the west, and then it's going to push it to the south, and then right up here, at that southwest corner of the site, it's going to push it across the street. Actually, it might gravity flow from that point. But anyway, all that to say, so there's a significant amount, and that's part of the reason why we think the SSA is going to be important. But we've looked at the water, we've looked at the sanitary. Those are really the two biggies when it comes to the utilities, and you're analyzing that. So that's the second point. I'm going to go really fast here. So if I'm too fast, please interrupt me or slow me down. Service demanded. Some of the environmental, so drainage plan, that comes back to stormwater. You know, that's all done, I think all the McHenry County standards, right? It's all kind of cut and dried. It's going to be so many cubic feet, you're going to have to be able to retain it for so long, and then it's going to have dispersant. You know, we'll try and do as much as we can. Just to regress for a moment, well, and maybe tying it in with the environmental. So, you know, we've had an arborist out. We've been kind of monitoring the site. We've tried to design, in fact, you see the one circular element between 104, 107, and 108 there. There's a huge, you know, 150-year-old tree there. And in order not to just have to come in and clear cut the site, you know, we've really made an effort to try and maintain that. And we've talked to the arborist about the work that's going to have to be done. And so, you know, when it comes down to spending money, how do we want to spend money? I'd rather spend money trying to save that tree, which may end up dying on us, right? But at least give it a try, rather than maybe spend money on some studies that we end up having to have those studies redone. We've had an environmental engineer out there already, so we've looked at things, we've dug around on the site to make sure that there's not gonna be any kind of crazy stuff in the ground, or we've had soil tests done to make sure that we're gonna be actually able to build buildings on the site. You know, we've analyzed things like wetlands, you know, kind of at a quick analysis on that. It's pretty clear that it's not, you know, the whole site's not covered by wetlands. We know that. So that's all pretty straightforward.
Just a quick question. If you've already had all this done, why wouldn't you have just followed the UDO from the beginning then and actually provided the documentation that was needed?
Do you think that the compliance level is there for the stuff that we've had done kind of back of the envelope that would meet your requirements?
I haven't seen any of the documentation yet, so that's where we've had conversations from that perspective. But certainly, if you've had the work, you know, it's, you know, kind of what information you've assembled.
Because I mean,
So
the UDO is put in because to kind of help protect the city. So I'm just kind of wondering.
I think it's a great question. I think my response would be to that is typically when we see these kind of requirements, we deal with guys like Brian. and they become stringent on us in terms of all the information they want to see. And so I think that's part of it. So yeah, I mean, is there some kind of a happy medium that we could do that's, kind of gets it to that point where it, I mean, we're comfortable, or we wouldn't have, presented it. But I think to push it a little bit further, we could certainly, we could certainly do that a bit as well.
Trustee Dudek, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I do. I appreciate all the all the dialogue back and forth. I guess it's hard for me to waive something that I don't understand what it's going to tell us. So, we all know if you were building 25 units there or 125 units, there's going to be more traffic. So, what's a traffic study? What's the benefit of it? I mean, we know there's going to be more traffic. Environmental statement. What is that? What is that even going to tell us once it's created? Can you define it for us? Because how can I waive something or even consider waiving it when I don't understand what it is? What is it going to be?
So the way our code reads is it's an environmental statement that identifies what environmental features are on the property and what potential impacts there would be from a development on those features. So identifying if there are sensitive features on the property as far as trees, wetlands, various drainage features that this site might be tributary to, and then it just is a narrative that describes how the proposed development will take those into consideration to mitigate any negative impacts.
Who does that study?
It's not a study per se. Our code used to say an environmental study, but we've had long discussions as far as what the impact study was in the past, so we changed the code to be just a statement of identifying what the natural features are on the property, what the potential impacts of the development would be. That would be the developer would provide that as part of their petition, what that statement would be.
Brian, just to clarify for all of these, the code does define what each of these are.
Correct.
So we would be able to, if the developer here presented you what they've done so far, you would be able to show what's missing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
Well, then I'll skip forward to kind of what my conclusion is. To me, the village services, that analysis is pretty important because we want to know, what's going to be the demand on police, fire, et cetera. The offsite utility and the drainage, those three are, to me, pretty important. The rest of them, I think I could set them aside for a time. That site has been vacant for how many years?
Long time.
And in my time previously on the board, there was only one person that I recall ever came with a plan for this property. So this is the second in my 20 years in Cary. I think we should try to find a way to make it work and not a way to not make it work. That's my 2 cents.
Great.
I do just want to go back, talking about, the statement you made, guys like Brian. I look at Brian as Director Simmons, and I look at him as an important staff member that gives direction to our board for looking out for the safety of our village. So when Director Simmons makes recommendations, I'm definitely listening to them. And so I just want to make that statement, and I agree with also Trustee Dudek. There are some I am willing to let go, but there's a lot that I'm not willing to let go. So as it stands right now with how it's worded for letter A, I wanted to kind of go ahead and vote unless anybody else has any, excuse me, with my voice. If anybody else has any questions, any other questions, but.
So can we get what he has and then come back to this and show what we have for these items already?
Well, it's on the agenda, right? So we do need to go ahead and vote on it how it is.
Well, what we're voting on right now is the waiver items that are listed on here.
Right.
Actually, C through Q as they're noted here.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, if you'd be patient enough, I think this is an interesting development. I think this is, I've always been in a favor of this. One of the things that it concerns me is there's going to be an annexation agreement. It's not in the Village of Cary. It's not under our jurisdiction. We don't know the property. We've really not had the need to know the property. So this is all new. One of the reasons why we have these waivers in place is to protect us and to make sure that we are all on the same page, we're all playing by the same rules, and we all have the exact same expectations. And what I've learned from this job, it's about managing expectations. Throughout this whole process, this is not our, first dog and pony show. If it was my second, would it be that better? Anyway, but anyway, I'm not afraid of a lot of the things that you're saying. Been through workforce housing, been through it. I can handle that again. The small portion that I would agree to would be a nice attribute to have for this property. I'll say about the development. I think it's cool. But personally, I am not in favor of waiving any of these things because there's a lot of unknowns right now. And we need to make a decision based on known facts. And it's only fair for you, the developer, to know where we stand on these things. So if you have the information that you have not submitted yet, well, then I'm not willing to make a decision based on something I don't know or I don't have. And I can't ask our board to support something or our staff. To Trustee Weinhammer's point, we rely a lot on our staff. They do the yeoman's work in the village. We hang our hat every single day on, they keep us on the straight and narrow. Some more than others, but I think that it's important that we have these waivers in place to protect us. So that being said, I'm not in favor myself of any of the waivers that you're suggesting. These, to me, are significant. If this does go forward, they're gonna come up. It's going to come up, and I would much rather have the information to show the community when we have to go through this process. So that's where I stand on this. Anybody else?
I know it's not in discussion now, so we probably can't. Do we like this project, how it's presented now and looks?
I think it's something you could talk. You're on the right. I think that the board would agree that you're on the right page.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
On the right page.
Great project.
And it's much better than what you presented, I think it was a year ago now, maybe 13 months ago, you presented to us before. This is a much better thing. And just, I would be concerned about what your timeline is. We've been working with you for a long time. What is your timeline? When do you've acquired the property, you've done what you've needed to do. Yep. We're anxious about these things. What is a realistic time frame? We've worked with other developers in the village, and we have instituted timelines and say this has to be done in 3 years. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of the phasing that you have here. Some of this property you don't even own yet, right? Correct. So how does that impact where you're going to start to? So
yeah, it's a great question, valid question. I wish I had a foolproof crystal ball, because the reality is we can certainly make projections. And, we would like to see it go fairly rapidly. But, that is one of the reasons why we're looking at 3 SSAs, And fortunately, we know the things we control and we know the things that we can't control. We can't control the economy. We just can't do it, right? But the way that we've designed it is such that there is an aspect of, if for whatever reason one of the phases would get delayed a little bit, it's not going to be, a catastrophic event. And that's one of the reasons we've tried to do that. And frankly, by the design of the structures, it actually aids us as well from an economic perspective with regard to that. So,
I could do that. I don't want you to walk away thinking that we're not grateful for this opportunity. Through my regional connections and what I do outside of the village for other government agencies, this is what we call the missing middle. These are housing units that we are in desperate need of. And I'm excited about this, and I want you to know that we want to work with you, but at the same time, we have a municipality to protect. We have residents that entrust our decision-making process in here. And I just had a recommendation from our attorney about perhaps we table this into the next meeting so that you've indicated you have some of this information. I think that if you were to submit some of that information to Director Simmons before our next meeting, that would give us a little bit more ammunition to make a best decision that we feel with the facts at hand.
Good.
So I'm getting a bunch of nods. So I'll entertain a motion to table this until the next meeting, which is when?
October 3rd.
October 3rd?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Do I have to do a voice vote for that? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So this will give you an opportunity to come back with the ammunition that you need to provide us with the best possible decision-making. I think it's a great project. I think it's an exciting opportunity for us, and we want to help you. This is why we're doing this. So it's by delaying this a couple of weeks, I think that you'll be able to give us the information that you need,
Sure.
that we need.
Yeah. And if I could just jump ahead a little bit, is that okay, or
Sure.
are we finished?
No, you can comment.
Well, so something that's really important to us is that we're doing this analysis, and let's talk specifically about stormwater because that's a big one, right? And stormwater is big calculations, and I don't know exactly what the requirements are specifically for the requirements at this stage.
I think Brian can provide you that, though.
But so what my concern is I'd be very disappointed, speaking candidly. I'd be very disappointed if we go through and we do that full stormwater analysis. Is that what it is? Is it a stormwater light? Stormwater analysis light?
Yeah, so we can give you what the code requirements are, but I think for the next meeting, it's not going to be, that detail is not going to be
Not
necessary.
terribly onerous.
But if you have the information that you've discussed this evening, that you've already looked at, the environmental aspects of it,
Right.
some of that information would be helpful for the board to make a decision, but we can have more conversations as far as what that actually would be, that
Okay.
you have, that can provide it.
Sure. So, and then the point that I was trying to get to is, it'd be very disappointing for us is if we got into a situation where we did a lot of this analysis, particularly with those things that are very specific, because stormwater comes down to impervious, right? And so we've already done that calculation. I can tell you almost, within a few square feet of what our impervious versus pervious calculation is for this concept plan. And so that really pushes us along. So what I'd be disappointed by is if we do all this work and all this analysis, and then we come back and then we have all these other conversations, you say, oh, really we want you to take the number of units way down. Because what that means is that we're going back to we're redoing all that. So just, and I may be stepping across the line here, out of bounds or something, but I wouldn't mind just having a little bit of conversation, because if you're gonna tell me that we've got to really scale it back, go ahead and tell me now.
Well, I think that would come out in
Yeah.
the determination of the
Analysis.
the analysis of the drainage plan. I think this is, we abide, we are our own, we can sign off on our own detention here, but we abide by McHenry County standards. So it's prudent for us to make sure that we do this, and it may come, you may submit something that says, well, maybe we need to tweak this a little bit. You may change some of the buildings that only have 2 units, maybe that's the 4, that's where you get your density. I didn't hear anybody complaining about your density. Not one
Okay.
person said anything about the density here.
Okay.
Which typically comes up, but this is an area that I think that can handle that. And this type of housing is nice, and I think it's something that would offer something to the village. But that said, we can't, you're worried about something you need to find out the answer to so that we can help you make that decision. You may have to shift some of these buildings to accommodate some sort of detention or however it would work out. And that's where Director Simmons can help you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for that.
Okay? All right, any other questions for him? Thank you, Mr. Gray, appreciate it. Look
right.
forward to seeing you
Thank you.
the next board, the 3rd
Thank you.
of October.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Moving forward, Administrator's report.
Nothing
Director
to see.
Morimoto? Nothing this evening. He'd had enough of me today? Is that what it is? Okay, I could get it. Department head reports. Chief Finland.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Director Noonan.
Brief update on the streetscape project. We have had a little bit of delay due to the weather, but they were planning to pave tomorrow. They're planning to pave on Thursday now, hoping to have that intersection opened up by the weekend is the goal. So
I just told somebody to say that it should be open by the weekend, so please make that happen.
Please make the rain stay away.
No, they were out there in the cutting in the paver bricks this afternoon and all morning when it was raining. They're out there in the pouring rain, so I appreciate that. Yeah,
that's all.
yeah, that would be nice.
I will do my best.
Kelly, you're saving us for next, right? Dan?
You want to take a recess so I can spend the next 2 hours going through? I'll try to condense a lot of information into a kind of short period here. So hopefully you've been getting and digesting the weekly updates and the memos and riveting outlines that I've provided. I'll kind of break this out a little bit into just similar type of approach of the types of things we're looking at, kind of starting with, in no particular order, but residential development is, there's always that, as you hear in this discussion took place, there's always conversations about residential. The downtown, Maplewood, just the core area is always a focal point when developers are inquiring or when I'm talking to people. So trying to find those development sites, and I'm going to reference Maplewood a couple times because it is the kind of the shiny object that's there. So there's always interest in Maplewood. Then trying to find, and we had a conversation earlier today about some of the other opportunity sites. A lot of them are represented in assemblage opportunities. How do we combine some of the sites within the downtown to create those development opportunities? And we're constantly looking at those, and they're there, but it's just there's multiple ownerships and some opportunities, some impediments to doing that. Route 31 becomes a focal point for a couple of reasons. As people get challenged in finding those larger sites, there's a lot of acreage out on Route 31, and there's been a lag in commercial development. I spoke to the owner of one of the larger sites the other week, last week, who previously had been a little bit reticent in terms of developing, but now is interested in doing that. So what I don't want to do is be out promoting sites that you don't have an interested seller or owner. Now we do, and we know that. We have some opportunity there, albeit I know historically the desire in the zoning has been for commercial and business development, and these are sites specifically I'm speaking to are south of Walmart, along the east side of 31. There still could be potential from a development standpoint to maybe maintain some commercial frontage that would complement what's there and what some of the desire was. But certainly the interest driving from the development community is to look at that, particularly since we're looking at some infrastructure improvements out there, the connectivity to the parks. There's a lot of opportunity and potential for additional residential development, and still see what we can do to maintain some commercial development opportunity. From a commercial standpoint, downtown, again, we can come to the downtown, and I'll talk a little bit more about TIF. But that area there is always of interest. I'm looking at, not discounting the other areas in our commercial areas and what those opportunities are. We have vacancies in some of the commercial centers that are existing. Speaking to the property owners and managers of those sites and what we can kind of plug in to those locations. From a retailing standpoint, ground up commercial is challenging just from a cost perspective. So plugging into some of these existing opportunities is a key component of bringing in development, and not discounting also just the need to maintain what we have here. Most important businesses, I always say, are the ones that are already here. You don't want to lose the core. So if we see somebody that wants to expand their business, we want to keep them in the community. So if we can find another site, if they can't expand in their existing footprint, but finding those ways to find other locations would be great. I mean, the greatest thing that you can have happen is have a business get so big and so popular that they've outgrown their site. So what you don't want to have happen, though, is outgrow their site and then leave because they can't find a site here. So that becomes an important focus of looking and working with existing businesses, and why that communication is so important. I've worked in communities where you find out later somebody's moving and they're leaving town and they're going right next door. And trust me, there's no shortage of desire of surrounding communities to try to attract the best businesses from an adjacent community. So you don't want to find out after the fact. So that dialogue is really important, and that's why I try to keep that dialogue going and keep the conversations and the communications open. So we're looking at, some of the commercial development. Obviously, we look outside the door here, we've got opportunity sites. It's just the development economics of trying to get the right end users from a land value. You kind of work backwards to a residual land value. What, at the end of the day, once you've factored in the development economics of construction and costs and revenue that can be generated by the site, some of the QSR, the quick service restaurants, they can justify some of the costs because of the volume that they generate, which is why you'll see some of these restaurants that are able to still develop in a market where others can't. So you have to get to a land value that can support the new construction. And that's one of the challenges we're going through right now. We've seen interest rates go up, construction costs go up, where some of the pro formas that I was looking at a year ago or 2 years ago are just, they don't even make sense anymore because of the changes in the dynamics of cost of the development economics. So, hopefully those things start to shake out a little bit in the future as we start to see there's some leveling off of interest rates and there's a little bit of calming of some of the cost, but that is a continuing challenge for new construction commercial. But we do have vacancies, we do have things that we're still trying to plug into. The industrial, we see Stryker is great to have that kind of an end user in the community, particularly if we can start to try to play off of that into some of the synergies and some of the co-locating opportunities. So continuing to explore those and what those opportunities might be. There's a lot going on in terms of just things that have happened in the community in the short time that I've been here. We were talking a little bit about this at the beginning. The water tower, that's not an economic development thing per se, but you look at it, it's a great thing to look out at and see just how well something like that complements the community. We're working on an economic development website. Courtney's doing a great job of working with the website developer. That's going to be a great asset for me personally to be able to go out and market the community better and have a point of information that's kind of a direct conduit to all things economic development and Cary. We've got you'll have available properties on there. We'll have, facts and figures about the community, the locational benefits, all those things that you can direct people to one source that all of you can also help, your ambassadors and your economic developers for the community in your conversations with businesses and people and when you're out at events to be able to market the community, and that's helpful for all of us because I'm not here all the time, and you're out in the community constantly, and this will provide a source where we can kind of direct people to. Kind of going back to what are those priorities? Somebody's asked me that several times. Like, what are the priorities? Honestly, there's saying what's a priority doesn't mean to take away from anything else, but Maplewood is a priority. We get Maplewood represents for several reasons. This is a catalyst. It's a catalytic project. It has the ability to spur development. It's in the TIF. It's vacant currently. There's opportunity that surrounds that area that can address a lot of these issues, from housing to connectivity to redevelopment. We talk about the Maplewood Road extension being part of that overall development. But you then everything else that kind of falls in place after that is I'd have to say the TIF and the core of the community. So the TIF is getting things implemented in the TIF district is going to be important. Now we have it. The TIF was adopted on August 15th. Now the hard work starts. It's getting that implemented and getting that increment generated. The core of the community, and that's where that is at, and it's why it's called the Central Cary TIF, is strengthening the core, to me, is important for any community. Any community, anything, if you take it as holistically outside of municipal government and economic development, strengthening the core. That is your core. We strengthen the core, all tides rise, all ships rise when tides rise. So that becomes a priority. But again, that's not discounting that any of the other commercial areas or any of the other residential development is not important to the community. So that is a segue kind of to what I am hearing also from, we have the discussion, and I know it's coming up at a future meeting, about incentives. Outside of the TIF, and when we talk about incentivizing businesses, I get asked a lot about what else is available. And so we look at the facade improvement program, as you're thinking this through, also think about just, what are those opportunities for, expanding it outside, not spending the community's money. It'd be easy for me to spend the community's money, but expanding it outside, if there is an opportunity, there's definitely interest in some property owners and developers in improving their buildings if those funds are available from a community standpoint. I've talked to several of you offline, and my invitation continues. Anytime you want to talk to me, go on a tour. We did a tour of the community. I've met with several. I really enjoy these conversations. I like to give and take. It's educating for me to hear what everybody's thinking. So anytime you want to just set up a meeting, I'm happy to do that. Like I said, it's helpful for everybody, and again, gives a different perspective for you to hear some of the things that I'm seeing and hearing, and for me to likewise hear what you're hearing. So at that's kind of a quick summary of all the things that are going on. There's a lot of potential here, and we're just going to continue to keep moving forward on all the opportunities that are here.
Great. Well, we have a question from Trustee Weinhammer.
Okay, so Mr. Gardner, I know that your role is relatively new within the Village of Cary. So with your updates, what I'm looking to learn, and I kind of want to just funnel this so that in the future when we have updates from you, you can tell us at least what I'm looking for, and then maybe what the rest of the board's looking for. I understand everything that you already stated, and I think the board, and I don't want to speak for the board, but I kind of feel like we already know where we have open spaces and things like that. So I'm not looking for a review of, what's already out there. I do read your reports. What I'm looking for you is to go ahead and explain to us, what's happening as far as you and who you're speaking with. I know you can't always give details on that, but I don't want like a review of what we already know. I want like new information on what is actually happening. And I want to keep it really concise. I don't want it to go on too long, but if you guys want to go ahead and share your thoughts on what you want to see maybe as a department head report, since this is a relatively new, since this is a relatively new role that the village is seeing, that's at least what I want to see. I don't want to see like things that we already kind of know. We know about the TIF. We know about businesses on 31. We know about those kind of things. So that's what I'm looking for. I need to drink water.
So,
well, I can answer that question or help you with that
Thank
too.
you.
Trustee Dudek and I and Dan and Eric did a tour. That we had a meeting this morning and a tour of the community. I think you will benefit greatly, and I think Trustee Dudek was blown away at.
I was just going to say, with all due respect, I have more time on the board than anybody, and I thought I knew a lot more about what's going on until I spent 2 hours this morning. So I think the best thing you could do, truthfully, is to do the one-on-one like I had the opportunity to do, and I think some others have done already. And it opened my eyes to things that I thought I knew, but I really didn't know.
Okay, so I'm just saying, like, as I'm listening here, I'm listening to things like that we've already heard and known about. And I understand I don't know 100%. And I get that you've been on the board like 17 years or something, or 18.
But it's not so much that, it's the things that, and believe me, you and I talked about this, I wanted to know just as bad as you did.
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's limitations that you can convey in a setting like this that
I
I learned
understand.
this morning. And that's why I think I would highly encourage, just as the mayor said, take the time, because there's things I learned today that I never knew from first term or even this term. And then when you start to go through it and you can talk in a completely different setting, I think you'll feel differently about it.
Do you want, as we do future updates, do you want to hear what's available? Or do you want to see about how we're moving forward? I'm just asking, I'm not trying to I'm just asking so that we can have our meetings be as informational as possible to us, so.
Well, I think what I saw when I was in the office today, excuse me, and maybe some of you have seen it, was the draft of kind of like the homepage, if you will, for business development. I don't think we've seen that, publicly yet, correct? Is that something? Okay. That site, when it's live, will have a lot of the stuff that you're asking about. You wouldn't have to ask what are the available sites, because you can go right to there.
Right, so I'm just saying, I feel that when we've gotten reports in the past, it's kind of been like this, these are the available sites, this is what we have. I kind of feel like, can we just be concise and move forward?
Yep.
And can you tell us, I know you can't share, I know he can't share everything, which we've discussed in the past, but I'm just looking at when we move forward with department updates, I'm not rehashing all the past things.
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants that.
Okay.
I think to the extent that it can be shared publicly, I would ask that Dan or anybody else and staff share it. But if it puts us at a competitive disadvantage to share things, then
Which we've already, discussed, and I completely agree with that. I'm just looking at.
You're looking to be just more concise.
Thank you,
Yeah.
yes,
And I agree.
We can work on that.
I agree with that.
No, even myself.
thank you.
Rick? Trustee Walrath? Okay. Anything else, Dan?
No, I was gonna I wanted to pick off that. Some of the things that I said about the developer interest in residential, there's a lot of different development types that fall within that. So it's not, and trust me, I'm not trying to be defensive, but just in terms of the type of developers that I'm talking to, there's ones that'll do mixed-use development, and that's pretty centric to the downtown. So when I'm saying these things, maybe that's not new information, but it's new in the sense of what we thought were some opportunity sites before. And this is where it starts getting into the gray area of talking about conversations with individual property owners that I don't want to necessarily step into and without talking to them. Like I said, that I talked to the property owner on Route 31 and said, before I'm out there talking about your property to somebody, I got to know that you want me to be talking about your property. And so that was a conversation that I had on Friday, and he said yes. So now I can tell you that the largest property owner on Route 31 is interested in marketing his property. That's a conversation that until having that conversation, I wouldn't be comfortable doing. I might be talking about it, people so saying, hey, well, let me talk, because I've have a developer come and say, hey, is property A, B, or C available? So I don't know until I go and talk to them. So once that's established, so when we were looking at some mixed-use opportunities, and of course, yeah, it's no surprise to anybody that Maplewood is an opportunity site. That's rehashing something known, but there's a continuing evolution of the moving parts that are going along with that. So what are the other sites that are there? There were a couple sites that we thought might be in play that turned out aren't in play, without naming specific properties, and it gets into that gray area. When I talk about the commercial opportunity, there are site selection people looking at sites that I talk to. I can tell you that there are some of the educational sites. There's like a behavioral site for schools for autism. There's a swim school. These are the types of people that could plug into our existing vacancies, but may not have the opportunity to build new. So that's what I think sometimes when people look at a site and say, yeah, we know it's an opportunity site, we've heard this before, but what you don't know is that it's difficult for them to develop it. So you look at it, whether it's me or an economic developer in another community, it's, hey, why can't we just get that here? Well, there's a lot that goes into that discussion. And that's one of the points that I'm trying to make, is that the focus then becomes on how do we get these places to retrofit and reposition other properties. So those are what is just an ongoing conversations that happen that isn't necessarily just rehashing things, because the conversation, the dialogue changes a little bit depending on who the end user is. So that's what I'm trying to convey, and why, as Trustee Dudek had indicated, I'm happy to have a conversation if there's somebody that you're interested or you want a little bit more detail. I'm happy to have that conversation.
Or,
Well,
like, go ahead.
No, go.
So, like, just for example, like Director Simmons or, I'm so sorry. I know you're like, I'm like drawing a blank on your name right now. Yes. Well,
Noonan.
Director Noonan. Okay, thank you. You know, we get these like really great, big, expansive information, and Director Simmons does a great job on putting like everything that's new in our updates in red, and I love that. And then when we get here to the meeting, we already have that background information, and then, you know, Director Noonan or Director Simmons can go ahead and just give us some updates here, and we already have that background information from all the information that we were able to read, and then we could reach out to Director Simmons or Director Noonan or the chief or anybody with questions that we have at that time, so we don't have to go ahead and ask those questions during this time. I'm just kind of trying to.
Well, I get it. Well, with what you're asking for too is part of what I think the benefit of these reports is. It's for the public. They have to hear what we're doing, what we're working on. What I've learned since I've been involved in this, economic development is like a rushing water. It changes all the time, and things change on a daily. Things that we thought we were going to be able to get done this year, the players just changed their mind and they're not going to do anything. So those are the kind of things that I think that are important, that we let, think like things that are happening today. 15 minutes before the meeting, we found out a big deal that might happen. So we have to be able to pivot and move those things. So I think it's good that we get these things. I think that we'll work on being a little bit more concise. I do agree that when Director Simmons gives his updates and the new stuff is in red, it really points it out much easier.
Thank you.
Trying to be concise there, but it's also good to give the community an update of what we're doing,
Agreed.
why we're doing this.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And Trustee Weinheimer, I think, I agree. We'll work on the conciseness. We'll work on giving you the meat and the potatoes and not rehashing.
Thank you.
But obviously, in the economic development side of things, as Trustee Dudek, I think, put very, very eloquently, that the sensitivity and the confidentiality and then making sure that what we put out there in our report doesn't unintentionally cause a side effect and make us less competitive. In the age of FOIA, we have to be cognizant of what we put in writing. We want to put everything out and be transparent. But when these things are kind of in that flux and that opportunity stage versus a proposal stage, there is that level of detail that we have to be cognizant of when we make these reports. So we'll balance that side with what you're asking as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Director Simmons, Mr. Big Shot over there.
I just want to add, just the piggyback on Dan's comments, is that I think having Dan and Mr. Carter here for the last year has been beneficial to the village. He's been able to have additional conversations that I might not have initially had on my own. He's brought in other contacts from that standpoint. He's brought in other interests and been able to have a different voice to bounce things off of as well, from a standpoint of seeing what might work in various properties. Economic development is a very challenging aspect. As the Mayor mentioned, it changes daily, monthly from that standpoint. The economy that we have today is different than what we had 3 years ago, or even 5 years even before that. So the type of development that we are seeing or getting inquiries on, there may be calls that we get or conversations we're having on particular properties that it's a great idea, it's a great project. It might not happen for 5 years. It might not happen for 10 years. You have to kind of start to have those conversations to determine what is feasible on various properties. We do have more properties in play now than we did when I first started here, from a standpoint that the ownership of them is now beginning motivated from a standpoint that there may be other things that can happen there. and having the TIF recently approved that does change the game in the downtown core area, the central portion of the village, that gives us an extra tool to be able to encourage development potentially as well. So I just want to say, having Mr. Gardner on for the last year has been beneficial from the village's standpoint. We're continuing to see the fruits of the labor from that standpoint, may come down the pipeline here in the near future. But certainly having him on staff has been an asset to the village from that standpoint, and hopefully we'll continue to see that going forward here as well.
Please don't take my comments as that I don't see Mr. Gardner as a not an asset. I do.
Correct.
Okay, so Mr. Gardner, I do want you to know that. I'm just asking for just a little bit of a change in the way things
The reporting.
Thank you.
And I didn't mean that's
No,
how it came
not at
across.
all.
That wasn't how I meant. But I think if you do have a conversation with Mr. Gardner or myself and want to do a tour at some point, we're happy to do so to kind of show what is happening from that standpoint. Have more in-depth conversation on various properties that I think would be beneficial to have.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. Make myself available. We had a great meeting today. Got a lot. I think Rick was when he left me a message. I was like, "Oh, that's nice to hear." Yeah. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Any future agenda items and discussion by the village board? None said. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 7:21 for a minute or two.